Hey everybody, Sarah, the Real Simple Mama here, and we're going to talk about fat birds. So this video is supposed to be educational / a public service announcement about chickens and obesity as we get into warmer weather. I know it's kind of a weird topic and I'm still learning more about it and trying to find solutions, but it's been on my mind, and so I want to teach you. So there are different kinds of chickens. Most breeds are either for meat, which means they get a high protein food. They bulk up really fast, sometimes to the point that they can't even stand straight and they can't keep their balance and they just fall over. And then they're usually culled, which means they're slaughtered before they're a year old. And most of the chicken that you eat, that you buy like from the grocery store or whatever, is young roosters that are less than a year old, just so you know. But anyway, so there's meat birds, and then the other end of the spectrum, unless it's like a hybrid type breed, is one that's a good egg layer. Okay. So there are all sorts of problems that happen with egg-laying birds, or just chickens in general, getting too fat. Chickens are the type of animal that they're going to eat if you give them treats. And chickens have a lot of other just things that work in the chicken world, like chickens aren't really capable of throwing up. You can try to pull things out of their crop. If they get a sour crop or impacted crop, they can aspirate, but of course that's not what you want. And they like to eat. So there are problems with having a chicken that's overweight, even though I know with a lot of us we feel like we love our pets, we want to give them the best that we can. So that means, you know, we want to indulge them, we want to give them treats and things because that makes them happy and they like it, and oh, they're so cute when they're doing, you know. But we need to be really, really careful, and there's a lot of different reasons why. So let's talk about why you don't want your chickens to get overweight. The number one thing is that obviously there's a whole bunch of health problems that are associated with it. Whether you have a meat bird or you have an egg-laying bird, they're a lot more prone to just having health issues. Another thing is it's a lot harder for a chicken to cool themselves down if they're overweight. Chickens do a lot better in winter, as a rule, than they do in the summer. When a bird gets hot, and I've noticed for me, it's right around when we hit 90 degrees here in South Texas, and we've been very, very humid. So for me, when the thermometer has hit 88, I've come and sprayed it down a zone. You can still see where it's darker there. I put ice in their water. I try to give them things that just help them stay cool, because chickens can't cool themselves down nearly as well. And you guys have seen, I have other videos that talk about how to keep a chicken cool in the summer. I'm going to do a video on the mister for a chicken, and if you want to use a mister that mists water, where you would want to put it, all that kind of stuff. But the problem with chickens is they don't have as many strategies to get cool as they do to stay warm in the winter. So you want them drinking a lot, of course. The fastest way to cool a chicken down is through their feet, because obviously they're not feathered, so their blood vessels are real close to the surface. So getting them to stand in a kiddie pool, spraying the ground, things like that, that's the fastest way to cool them down. Your chicken can pant, so if you see your bird with their mouth open and panting, then you need to cool them down. So, but those are the main problems. The other thing that I thought of the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, is other injuries like bumblefoot will happen more frequently if your bird is too fat. And this sounds kind of horrible, but if you're thinking about looking at this roost right here, my chickens do not sleep out here at night, but they like to hop up here and just hang out and talk and complain to me and, look outside and whatever. So if your bird hops up here, whether they fly or they hop or whatever, when they go back down, if your chicken is overweight, they're a lot more likely to either hurt their hip joint, which is, up in their feathers, like in that poofy spot like Lacey's got, or to give themselves bumblefoot. And bumblefoot is essentially like a staph infection, so they get an open wound. So essentially the padding of their foot breaks open, right? It splits, and if they're more overweight, that's more likely to happen. And then because your chicken stands around in dirt and poop and stuff all day, they basically get what's essentially a staph infection. And there's different ways to remedy it, but of course, a chicken is going to hide an injury. They hide pain because they are flock animals and they don't want to look weak. And meanwhile, it's getting worse and worse and it's going into their bloodstream. So anyway, I am very paranoid. I've had to deal with bumblefoot before, and so it's another thing that scares me. And I know that I lost 2 birds last summer, not at the same time. We lost my original silver-laced Wyandotte. Her name was Dottie. And then that was in July. And then in September, we lost Lollipop. And both of those, I believe, were heat-related. And with Dottie, it was heat and weight-related. So here are some of the challenges And I'm still learning. I'm certainly not an expert. I have more research to do, but this has been on my heart, and I feel like I would rather give you some information now so you have things to think about and you can look into it and you can decide what to do, instead of me just waiting and waiting and waiting and see if I have time to do research and when and all that stuff. So the challenge with a chicken is you can't necessarily say, okay, well, you're this breed and you're this height, so you should be this big. It's not like those of you who have kids, you know, you go to the pediatrician and they map out like their growth chart. You know, okay, your kid is in the 50th percentile for height and they're in the 30th percentile for weight. It doesn't necessarily work that way. What is Flopsy doing? She's like hanging out under there. It doesn't necessarily work that way with chickens. Now, sure, there's a guide. You know, these breeds are meat birds, like leghorns, for example. They're huge chickens. And sometimes in chicken factories and stuff, like I said, they get so fat so quickly, they literally can't stand and they're top heavy and they just fall forward. So there should be a generic guide for these breeds are usually this big, but it's not like you can necessarily weigh your bird and you know. So what do you do? And I think you have to just know your chickens. You have to look at them over time, take pictures of them. And you need to, I know it sucks, but you need to kind of just pick them up and feel them. When you're chicken, here's a couple of just physical things to look at. So you're not just like, well, is my bird just poofy or are they big boned or what? So if we look at Callie, because she's modeling for us right now, this is Calypso. She is a black sex link. And it basically is just sort of like a hybrid, very inexpensive, very basic breed. And a sex link means they are colored differently. They've been bred to be colored differently if they're male or female. So when they're chicks, like literally when they're hatched within a day or two, you know for sure this is going to be a hen or this is going to be a rooster. And that's really good for people who, you know, they can't have roosters or they know what they need or whatever. So much for her being a model. But just talking about a chicken, when they have eaten a lot, they have, you know, a crop and they have a gizzard and they have their stomach. So they've got a way different digestive system than we do. And a crop is sort of like a holding spot, and it's in the front on their breastbone, sort of like where your sternum would be. Of course, now none of the chickens are looking at me. Chick, 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 chick. Hey, chick, chick. So their poofy part in the chest that kind of curves forward. When your chicken has just eaten a decent amount, and I know they forage all during the day, but that's going to be sticking farther out, right? Because it's full. And it's going to be soft if you go and touch it. When their breastbone is hard to find, then that's a good indicator that there's a problem. If you start to see bumblefoot happen a lot in your chickens, that's a problem. Basically, what the best way to check, if we go back to the breastbone and the crop situation, early in the morning when your chickens are asleep or they're just now waking up, they haven't had anything to eat all night, their crop should be empty, right? Because they haven't eaten since the evening before. That's when you should check. And you should be able to feel like a bony ridge right there in the middle. If you go and touch their breastbone, you should be able to feel it, that split right there in the middle on the chicken's breast, right there in the front. Of course, mine, this is when they're eating a lot. You know, it's, what time is it? It's like 5:30 right now. We're not going to get dark for a couple more hours. So they're foraging and they're eating and they're doing chicken stuff. But you want to double check. In the mornings, you should be able to feel that, and it should be bony. That's also just to make sure there's nothing wrong with their crop or their gizzard or anything like that. So, with that being said, the challenge is, how do you help your chicken lose weight? It's not like you can tie them to a treadmill or, you know, get them a trainer or anything like that. And the main thing you're going to have to do, and I say this out of guilt as well, is you need to limit the treats and you need to make sure they have enough room to move around. Right now, my girls are confined to this coop. It's just a temporary situation. They've only been in here less than 2 months. It's just a temporary situation until we get their run built, which should be done this weekend, and it will more than double their space. And then they will have a lot more space to forage and to move around. Of course, chickens don't run for long distances or anything like that. But if they're confined in a tiny little coop space, then, you know, they're not going to be as active because they have nowhere to go. So, you know, I've got a video on chicken diversions where you can build roosts and swings and all different kinds of things for them. But really, what you need to do is just give them enough space so that they can move around. And you need to limit the treats. Even if it's a healthy treat, like I've got extra kale sitting in the fridge right now, just raw, plain kale, waiting for them. And it's nice and cold and it's going to be great. But you know what? They got something yesterday, so I'm not giving them anything today. And especially as we get into hotter weather, I need to slim them down a little bit because I'm so afraid that I'm going to lose another bird. You know, ventilation is a factor. If we start talking about the heat, you know, ventilation is a factor. There are other things to consider also as it gets into summer that you need to be careful. But I need to really limit their treats. If I do feed them during the summer, I need to make sure that the treats are not during the heat of the day, because the way your chicken's body stays warm is it digests. So they need to eat more in the winter, because that's literally how they keep the little furnace going and how they stay warm, is, you know, puffing up and warming up the air in between the layers of the feathers, and eating is how they stay warm. But hey, it's summer, so I don't need them to stay warm, so I need to not feed them during the heat of the day. So I usually feed them in the morning. If I'm going to give them something, I make sure that it's cool, and I make sure that it's healthy. So either we've got that box of fly grubs that I did the review this last week. They've got a little bit of mealworms left, and then they get, you know, vegetables from leftovers or from my garden, like herbs from the garden. So lots of different things that are options. But again, I don't really have an easy solution. I have more research to do. If I find more things out, then I will let you know. But they're hanging out and digging in there. So just keeping an eye on your chickens, especially as it gets hot, to make sure that you don't let love kill your birds, because they're not going to be able to distinguish, like, hey, I need to stop eating. Like, they'll eat until they're full, even if they didn't really necessarily need it. So just being careful and making sure that your chickens aren't getting too big, because I've lost a bird to that and I will never forgive myself. So just thinking about it. If you've got ideas or suggestions or experiences with chicken and obesity, obese chickens, keeping your birds from getting too big, let us know. And again, this is primarily for the egg laying / pets, but it's a good thing to remember for all animals. So just a couple of things to think about. I'm Sarah, the Real Simple Mama. I appreciate you watching.